All right. Hello, everyone. It looks like we are live. And first of all, want to start off by wishing everyone a happy St. Patrick's Day. Please celebrate safely. Get home safe, everyone, if you're out celebrating. Absolutely. And we want to welcome you to this stream because we're going to be covering the Second Amendment. First off, I'm Kevin Hammer.
I'm Chris Barrett. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone.
Absolutely. I'm not gonna lie. I've had a couple. I'm not gonna lie and say I haven't. So as we dive into this, we're going to be discussing the Second Amendment from the perspective of just the average gun owners. That's something that Chris and I have talked about doing for a while now. I've had, gun experts on my podcast before, back when it was just me. But I really wanted this to be a stream that came from the heart, from the hearts of just, two ordinary gun owners and discussing why they value the Second Amendment and going over video clips of why it's important. Now, these clips we're going to be reacting to tonight are a little bit longer than our usual clips, but I think that it's important that we actually play the full clips because some of them are actually news broadcasts, which really highlight just how important the Second Amendment is to all Americans, regardless of a political affiliation.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And there's a great magazine that the NRA puts out. It's like Shooting Illustrated, I think is what it's called. And I happen to get it too. And every month when you get it, they put in all these great examples of why the Second Amendment is important. And I really appreciate that because, it reminds you why law-abiding citizens should be allowed to have guns, I mean, we're not talking about machine guns and tanks and all this type of crap. We're just talking about things that you can defend yourself with or things that you can go hunting with. It's really as simple as that. And I think that unfortunately that bit of common sense has been lost on a certain part of our society.
But Chris, we got to be honest about this. If your neighbor had a tank in regards to the Second Amendment, you'd certainly behave yourself. No, but
No,
I only say that because in the
it.
in the past, cannons, for example, because Biden once brought those up, are actually in the past have been covered by the right to bear arms. But we're not going there in this stream. This stream is specifically focused on those vulnerable demographics. And the demographic we're going to start off with is one of the most vulnerable of all, and why the Second Amendment is so important to America, and that is the elderly. In this clip, we are going to see a 79-year-old woman and why the right to bear arms probably saved her life. So let's get into it.
A 79-year-old with a gun defends her home when a burglar breaks in. She shot him at least twice, and she did it while she was on the phone with 911. She held him off for nearly 10 minutes until deputies got there and arrested the man. John Sherrick has the 911 call from a brave woman protecting her home and herself in Jackson County.
Jackson County 911.
The family farmhouse in Jackson County, more than 100 years old.
They can't get in the back door. Hurry, please.
The family's matriarch inside and on the phone with 911 is 79.
I'm in the kitchen.
The man accused of breaking into the house is 20.
Oh, they're breaking glass.
And the rounds inside the woman's pistol, at least 2.
Okay, come on up in here. I got something for you. Ma'am, listen to me.
For nearly 10 minutes, around noon, February 12th, the 79-year-old woman and her pistol took control of a home invasion while she gave the 911 dispatcher a play-by-play of the 20-year-old man who she said was ransacking another part of the house, later arrested and charged, Hans Rogers of Dallas, Georgia. The woman whispering to the 911 dispatcher how frightened she was and praying,
Please hurry. Please hurry. Please. Lord have mercy.
woman shouting to the burglar who had gone up the back outside stairs and broken through the door and was ransacking the upstairs rooms.
I'm waiting on you. Come on. Come on. Oh, come on down here, you see.
Ma'am, are you shooting at him again?
Yes, ma'am.
Shooting toward him, she told her daughter later to keep him away from her. He finally hid in a closet, frightened of the woman, until deputies arrived to arrest him.
He's 20.
Right,
She's 79.
right.
What was the difference here?
She didn't allow herself to become a victim. My mother is a very strong woman. I know where I get my strength from now. As a matter of fact, I think she's a little stronger. I don't know if I could have handled that situation as well as she did. My mother's a very spiritual person, and God knows she was not because if she wanted to hit him, she could have hit him. She just wanted to keep him off of her.
They said the sheriff told them later the suspect has a history of medical issues, needing prescription medication, which he did not have that day, a possible factor in this case.
Looking back on it, I thank God that he found my mother and not someone else, because he could have been dead now. You know what I'm saying? So
What do you and your mother want for him now?
help, the help that he needs.
A 79-year-old woman in a century-old home praying now for a second chance for a 20-year-old burglar.
That is some kind.
So, Chris, a few things here. First of all, God bless this woman's heart. This 79-year-old woman, bless her. I mean, even in that moment, she's thinking about this young individual's spirit, about his salvation. This young man who's 20 years old, which all the more right there, right? How guns are the great equalizer. We're talking about a 20-year-old man versus a 79-year-old woman. Insane. Chris, I'm going to just throw it to you quick. What?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of one of those things when we first saw this, the thing that crossed my mind is that I doubt that he probably had the level of compassion for her that she had for him, and her daughter, I think, is the one who was being interviewed, she's right. I mean, thankfully for him, at least, he did meet someone who wasn't shooting to kill. She was just trying to scare him, keep him away from her. And she had every right to do that sort of thing. And, I mean, I think that, she probably saved herself a lot of trouble by not having killed him. But on the other hand, hopefully she set some sort of example for him that maybe he will, at some point in time pick up. I mean, when they did bring up the thing about that he needed some sort of prescription medications, it kind of sounded like they were trying to give some sort of excuse as to, he did what he did. And I mean, as someone who is on prescription psychiatric medications too, I mean, even at the times where I have gone off of them because I've forgotten to take them or whatever the case may be, didn't make me go out and want to, burglarize somebody's house. I mean, so I'm really not sure what that was all about. That part was a little confusing to me.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. And I mean, this is obviously, this is one of the top discussion points whenever I get into a discussion about gun control, gun ownership, the Second Amendment, with those who are opposed to guns, is this example right here, right? Is that guns are the great equalizer. And in this case, they weren't only the great equalizer. You have a gun that's in the hand of someone who has a very forgiving and kind and godly heart, right? So, I mean, it just astonishes me how many people seem to be so firmly against the right of Americans for us to defend our own lives, the lives of those we love, our home, our property, from threats, both foreign and domestic, because that is the purpose of the Second Amendment. We're going to touch on hunting later, but let me just say, hunting is not what the Second Amendment is about. I get into that conversation so many times, but that is not what it's about. Before we jump to the next topic, though, I do want to acknowledge Vinny in the chats, both on Facebook and YouTube. Thank you for double dipping there, Vinny, and saying hi on both platforms. It's greatly appreciated. I hope you'll stick with us through the entirety of this stream. I realize that some people are celebrating tonight, even though it's a Monday. So they probably won't be on as much this evening.
It's going to be a bad Tuesday for America.
I know, it's going to be a pretty bad Tuesday. But we appreciate those of you who are on listening to us go on and on, especially when it comes to a topic like the Second Amendment. But yeah, I think about my future, my husband's future, Chris, as we get older, and it makes me think about having security all the more. And obviously, gun ownership is another part of that. Gun ownership is another part of that American experience and being able to feel secure, especially as you become part of the older demographic, as we saw here with this 79-year-old woman.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. So in this stream, we're going to be going from one demographic to another, and then we're going to loop around and just have an overall discussion. Before we jump to the next, I do want to say hi, Billy. It's nice to hear from you. I'm looking forward to the stream I will be doing with Billy as well. That'll be coming up in the near future. That's under wraps right now, but we will be talking about it soon. All right. So with that, we're going to go from why the Second Amendment is important when it comes to our elderly to another demographic, not just women, but pregnant women specifically. And boy, do we have a new segment for you that covers that perfectly. Here we go.
Masked. As soon as they ripped my back door open, they already had a pistol on me and was grabbing my 11-year-old daughter.
King is talking about the men who barged into his home on Old Welcome Road in Lithia around 9 o'clock Wednesday night. He says he doesn't know who they are, never met them, and has no idea why he was targeted. Both men pointed guns at him while demanding money.
And when I'm telling them I have nothing for you, they got this backpack and gun in my face saying, give me everything you got. And I'm saying, I have nothing for you. I have nothing for you. It became real violent, real fast.
King says one of the men started pistol whipping him while another kicked him repeatedly in the head. King's wife, who was 8 months pregnant, was in the back bedroom and peeked out to see what was going on. That's when King says one of the masked men shot at her. She retreated, grabbed an AR-15, and returned fire.
When he came towards the back door in her line of sight, she clipped him. He made it from my back door roughly 200 feet out in the front ditch before the AR did its thing.
Deputies who responded to this scene found a man dead in a nearby ditch. The other man ran off after the shot was fired.
Them guys came in with two normal pistols. My AR stopped it. Pretty much she evened the playing field and kept them from killing me.
Authorities are still looking for the second suspect. Meanwhile, King tells me he's waiting to see if there will be any lasting damage to...
All right. So obviously, we just went from a 79-year-old woman with a gun defending herself from a 20-year-old. One, clear example, guns are the great equalizer. And here we are, a situation where we have people breaking in, two men breaking in, subduing the husband, beating the husband, and the wife's in a back room. They shoot at her, and then she's able to defend not only herself, not only her children, her unborn child, but also her husband. And she's able to save everyone's life, all because of the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms. Chris, I'm going to throw it to you quick.
Sure. Yeah, I mean... The reason that she probably had that gun so ready to go is also the same reason that, I sleep with a gun next to me in my nightstand, because if somebody's going to break in, I don't know what kind of level of strength they may have. I mean, I'm not a young guy anymore. I'm 47 years old, and not that I'm ancient and couldn't put up a good fight, but why should I have to bother with that with someone who's breaking through my door, or in this case, like this woman, beating the crap out of her husband. Why should she have to go out there and try to fight them physically? Just use a gun, blow their heads off. That's exactly what she did. And I'm totally fine with what she did. She should have done that, and she did the right thing. She probably saved her husband's life.
Oh, I think unquestionably, from what they described, the way they were beating him, and then the fact they actually shot at her, I have no doubt that she saved not only her husband's life, but her life, obviously, the family's life, just all across the board. I mean, this woman was amazing. Although, Chris, I gotta admit, I'm a bit offended there because I'm turning 40 this year. So when you brought on that the 47-year-old comment there, I felt a little bit hurt. No,
Well, hey, welcome to old age.
I know, right? But all the more, like I said, that's one of the things I think about as me and my husband get older is how best can we protect the home that we live in? How best can we protect our lives, our property, everything that we care about? And the Second Amendment, in my opinion, is the obvious answer, the obvious response right there.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, there are so many people who want to deprive all Americans of that right. So the based mother, love you so much.
Oh my gosh, Elena.
I know, right? She commented, the base mother, Kevin's in his 30s, having no right to feel bad about his age. Based mama, if only you knew how I've aged and the life I've lived, especially in my 20s.
Oh my gosh, Elena! I've got to say hello to Elena and love her to pieces. Oh my gosh,
yeah, Elena, we both adore you, and we'd love to have you on in the future because you are an amazing woman who we both admire. So we definitely would love to have you on in the future. And once again, folks, that is the based mother in the comments. We got the smiley with the heart eyes. Love you too. All right. So obviously, right now we've had these two great examples, right, of vulnerable demographics who have benefited from the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms here in America. We have a 79-year-old woman who fended off a 20-year-old man. And by the grace of God, God bless her, found it in her heart to only want the best for him and trap him in a closet with the gun. Then we have an example of a young mother, a pregnant woman, right? Her husband gets beaten down. He got beaten down. They shot at her, and she managed to shoot back with an AR-15. And she did. It was a deadly shot, but rightfully so. I mean, come on. We're dealing with someone shooting at a pregnant woman here. So these are two great examples of how guns are the great equalizer in our nation. But now we're going to take a little bit of a turn here. We're going to go into gun control laws. Because one thing, Chris, you and I both know, and I'm sure anyone who loves and supports the Second Amendment in America knows, is that gun control is deeply rooted in racism in America.
Oh, yeah.
And in this clip is actually a clip from an NRA video. I will post that full video in the description below once I have a chance to update. But we're just going to watch that to get a brief history of exactly how gun control is rooted in racism here in America.
Gun control has absolutely nothing to do ideologically with the control of firearms. If you do even a most cursory look at history between guns and gun ownership, you will find that without question, gun laws were created to restrict gun ownership from certain classes of people.
Long before the revolution, long before the drafting of the Second Amendment, laws were passed in the various colonies in what is now the United States to take away guns from minorities.
The first gun control laws in America start in 1620 in Virginia when the legislature enacts a law saying don't let black people have guns. And that's been sort of the key theme of American gun control for centuries ever after.
in the famous Dred Scott opinion, Justice Tawney makes it clear that one of the reasons blacks should not be treated as equal citizens is that if they are, they will enjoy the right to keep and bear arms wheresoever they go.
It wasn't that they said the Second Amendment doesn't apply to these people. It was, they're not considered people. Because if they're considered people, they would have the right to own firearms.
Even though the slaves were freed by the 13th Amendment, some states still prohibited black people from being armed.
And so you get a whole spate of state-level laws, either explicitly barring African Americans from enjoying their civil rights, or doing so cleverly. For example, by restricting what guns are available, maybe to those who served in the Confederate Army.
All right, so right there, once again, this is a video from the NRA focusing on the racist history of gun control in America. And once again, I will post a link to the full video in the description below once I get a chance to do those edits. But Chris, you and I, we both deal with the left. But this case, I want to be a bit more careful. I want to say more the liberal kind of left. And they talk so often against gun control. So, for gun control, against gun ownership. So aggressively so. And what's insane, though, is they talk about all these vulnerable demographics, right? And they talk about all these vulnerable demographics, elderly, women, people of color. And we're going to get, actually, funny enough, onto LGBT in a moment. But they talk about all these vulnerable demographics. And yet, also at the same time, want to strip these demographics, Americans, of their right to defend themselves, while also telling them not to trust the police. Isn't that's a bit insane to me? And when you look throughout history, not just in the history of America, where our gun control is most assuredly rooted in racism, you see a history of governments using gun control to disarm their people, to disarm the demographics that they want to target the most. What do you have to say, Chris?
Well, some of this kind of reminds me of some of the stuff that I see in the UK. It may not necessarily be based as much in racism there. I'm not really 100% sure, but it is using gun control as a way of controlling the population. Obviously those slave owners and stuff did not want an armed population. And I do have to give out a shout out, by the way, to the Dred Scott case. That was actually something that was decided here in St. Louis, Missouri. And it's a sad part of Missouri history. But if you do go to St. Louis, that courtroom that case was actually decided in is actually still existing. That courthouse is still there. If any of you have seen the picture of the arch with the building that looks kind of like some sort of Capitol building, that is where the Dred Scott case was decided. But back to the UK, what I noticed with them is they have gone so far in trying to control their society and evidently not wanting people to be able to actually stand up for themselves in some sort of way. It's almost like the UK government fears its citizens, just like these slave owners feared slaves having a right to guns. And the thing is they've gone so far as that now things like, tasers and pepper spray are illegal there.
So, Chris, I don't mean to cut you off there. So I live in New York State, right? I'm from New York. And in New York, we have the SAFE Act. We have gun control to insane levels. And not only gun control, we have laws against brass knuckles. We have laws against butterfly knives, because it's a semi-automatic knife, I guess. If it's a butterfly, I guess that's why a butterfly knife is a semi-automatic
blades or something. Is that how it works?
Okay, even though, by the way, a couple years ago, that did not stop a group of teenagers with one of them pulling a butterfly knife on me and trying to take my cell phone from me where I lived. That didn't stop them, right? It just made me more vulnerable in that encounter.
And to your point about being careful about the left, because I don't want to you're right. I don't necessarily want to group every single one of them into this, because we know that most of them probably aren't racist, but we're talking about the progressive left. You had said the liberal left or something like that. I like to say progressive left, because those progressives, they're the ones who are the problematic ones, in my opinion.
So in my experience, Chris, and this might kind of be a reflection of our different experiences here. When it comes to guns, and I'm only limiting this to guns, what's interesting is I have had more conflict with your standard Democrat, your standard liberal, than I have had leftists. And here's why. Leftists hate the idea of, at least the leftists I've known, right? They hate the idea, fear the idea of conservative government so much that they actually support the right to bear arms. Most of them do, that I've interacted with. And that's what's, because they're so strongly anti-government in the conservative sense, ironically, given the Second Amendment, which is all the more reason why I believe that the Second Amendment shouldn't be a right or left issue. It's an American issue, and it's an American issue about us having the right to protect ourselves from threats, both foreign and domestic. But that's why I worded it that way, Chris, is that funny enough with this, it's been more the liberal Democrat left than the far leftist where I've clashed when it comes to gun rights.
You're right. I don't disagree. Now that I think about it, that probably is kind of a good point. I don't know. I mean, I guess everyone kind of left of center is a little all over the place with this, I guess, is where maybe I was more going. It's kind of, it's a group of people that are kind of hard to pin down. Like I said, anyone who's left of center, they're a little bit harder to pin down. So yeah, I get that. I get what you're saying.
One moment, people. I'm just checking my connection here. I've been notified that apparently there's weakness in it. All right, there we go. We should be good. Sorry about that.
No, you're fine. But yeah, I really do think that we're dealing with kind of a lot of inconsistency when it comes to the left. I mean, there is that part of the left, and I know exactly what you're talking about because I used to be a part of that left. And I certainly believed in gun rights as well, because I wanted to be able to defend myself against the big boogeyman right-wing government or whatever the case may be. So, so some of that stuff did kind of transfer over for me when I made kind of a shift to the right. And so I do know what you're talking about. That does definitely make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and to be fair, when it comes to the Second Amendment, I am more conservative, obviously, than because I will admit some of these leftists, I am like, but you vote for Kamala Harris, you vote for Biden. These are certainly not individuals who in any fashion support your right to bear arms against, threats, foreign and domestic, especially, if a tyrannical government, let's be honest. But I'll also be honest that a lot of Republicans are not pro-Second Amendment enough for me either, to a large degree. I am leaps and bounds more pro-Second Amendment than Donald J. Trump, I'll admit that. So I do want to, when it comes to the Second Amendment, give that acknowledgement that there are elements across the political spectrum that do believe that we as a people have a right to defend ourselves.
Yeah, that is true. And I'm glad that you're kind of giving that shout out, because I think that it is important to acknowledge that this isn't necessarily a partisan issue in the sense of left or right. It's maybe more of a partisan issue in the sense of Democrat versus Republican.
I I'd say that probably is a little bit of a closer way to describe that. Absolutely. Now, before we go on to the next video, the last thing I want to mention is in regards to the racism aspect. I don't know if you've experienced this, Chris, but I have. I've had someone, usually an anti-gun Democrat, share a meme that shows on the top a white family holding guns, right? And then on the bottom shows a black family holding guns. And they think they're making this amazing statement where they say, well, does one bother you and the other doesn't? If so, blah, blah. I'm like, no, I'm fine with both. The black family, the white family, the interracial family, all families, I'm fine with them bearing arms. I want them to be able to protect themselves. The only criticism I had on one of those photos was that the one group had poor discipline when it came to their trigger finger, right? They had their finger on the trigger, and the way they were pointing it, I was like, no, you shouldn't be doing that. But as far as the demographic you're pointing to owning a gun, no, I support all Americans when it comes to bearing arms.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, same for me. And in fact, when we open things up for the larger discussion, for those of you who don't know, my dad was a Kansas City police officer. And so, I mean, for those of you who don't know, Kevin knows because he finally saw our city. It's not a tiny little thing in the middle of the Midwest. It's a pretty big city. The thing is, like, there was something that happened there, a story that my dad shared with me, and I want to make sure to bring that up, and it does tie in with race issue.
Absolutely. And I next wanna, before we go on to the next topic, we have Vinny, Billy, and the based mother all giving shout outs to each other in the comments on YouTube. We love you all. We love you all. Thank you for the comments. Thank you for the engagement. We greatly appreciate it. So with this next video, we go from, obviously, so far we've covered how the Second Amendment protects the elderly as an equalizer, right? We've covered how a pregnant woman can protect her family, her home, and how the Second Amendment is a great equalizer, how guns are a great equalizer for her. And we've covered a little bit the racist history of gun control in America. Now we're going on to another conversation here. Here we have Charlie Kirk, which, first of all, before I move forward here, shout out to Charlie Kirk and individuals such as, Preston. It's Charlie Preston, right? I believe, for their great work they did in the last election. So Charlie Kirk was one of those individuals who worked so well, so fiercely to make a difference in this last election.
Oh,
Charlie Kirk is
Sean Preston, I believe.
Sorry, Preston. Yeah. I'm horrible with names, by the way, people. So yes, Preston, yes. We have so many amazing individuals who worked this last election to make great change happen, and we thank them. And Charlie Kirk is one of them, and he is part of this next video where he engages with a gay college student in regards to the Second Amendment. So we're just going to watch that, and then we're going to respond.
Gun control. Yeah. Sure. Okay. So I know, we have a Second Amendment. We're protected owning firearms. Yes. As a gay person, I often fear of retaliation, hate crimes. I've actually been mugged a few times. Wearing stuff that may not seem as normal as this. Okay. What can we do from a Second Amendment perspective to help bring people into the fold of gun ownership in order for self-protection?
Yeah, I think that's a thoughtful question. I mean, look, I think if you've been mugged and everything, I'm sorry that happened to you. The gun's a great equalizer, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that people like you need to speak up and be like, look, if you think you're going to be terrorized or you're going to be hunted, like, the gun is a moral right to be able to defend yourself and your liberty, right? And your family or your people you love. I mean, I suppose it'd be a better question for you, right? Like, what do you think that a majority of gay people are pro guns or anti? I'm just curious. Like,
Mostly anti-gun.
Why do you think that is? I'm just curious.
I think it's a lot of like liberal identity politics. How can we like bridge that like distance?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that, look, I don't think gun ownership should be political. I don't. And like, this is one of the arguments I always make for like BLM people, right? It's like, if you think you're getting hunted down, then like responsibly own guns, right? But there is a fear around gun ownership in America. I think it should transcend, you know, sexual persuasion or skin color, right? I think it's a moral right for all people, especially if you think, I mean, especially women who are, you know, potentially at a physical disadvantage from defending themselves, right? And I mean, you got mugged a couple times. I don't know if the person who mugged you is a man or a woman. I don't know, but like, if you were in a situation where you're physically disadvantaged, like a firearm could equalize that, right?
Yeah, it's a pretty like out there.
Is it taboo, like taboo? Almost,
yeah,
or?
like I'm very like no, go for it, like get into a girl, but then it's also just kind of like not really. I don't want to say like frowned upon, but just kind of like, whoa, that's a bit much from like someone like me. But I just thought I'd ask.
Well, I want to encourage you, like, don't let that get to you.
I'm much more like pro gun ownership and like Second Amendment type of thing.
Yeah, okay. And that's because of necessity, like basically what happened, like what happened to you, or just...
Yeah, but also just more of like, you know, community defense, I would say.
Sure.
I mean, I don't think people should be like shooting each other in the streets or like dueling.
No, I don't support that. Obviously.
I know,
Right, yeah.
But like, it's definitely something that I think that like a lot more like LGBT people should really take into account, just to protect ourselves and like some people.
Yeah, look, I totally agree. Like, I mean, if you believe you're being targeted or you're in a marginalized position, like, that's what the Second Amendment is partially there for, right? I mean, one of the reasons. So.
Yeah, I just want to ask you because you're like a very big like political person.
Yeah, I would just kind of take it from a moral argument too, right? Which is like, if you believe, like, who are you going to trust to defend yourself? That's what I would think, right? So it's like, do you trust the police, which obviously is not a big thing around here, right?
Yeah.
Do you trust, like, you know, I don't know, someone that you think will hurt you? Then the moral argument of the Second Amendment is that you should be responsible for your own autonomy and your own, you know, your own safety, right? There's other reasons too. But...
Okay, thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
All right. So first of all, I love this engagement when it comes to the Second Amendment, right? I absolutely love this engagement. Vinny has a comment, which I will address after you and I speak, Chris, just because it's definitely a comment worth responding to. Thank you, Vinny, for that comment. But before we get to that comment, I just want to say a few things about this. So watching this clip, I myself could not help but think of what happened in regards to the Pulse nightclub massacre, right? This took place on June 12th, 2016, right? We saw 49 lives lost. And up until that point, it was the largest mass shooting in American history. And so, full disclosure, I was actually out on June 11th, the evening of June 11th, celebrating my birthday. My birthday is June 12th. When I woke up the next morning on my birthday and I saw all the notifications, I will admit that still sits with me to this day, you know, because heck, I was out at the club that same night until the morning hours, until the early morning hours of June 12th. I was out that morning. And I have to say, following what happened with the Pulse nightclub, it was the first time that I saw a lot of my friends on the left who happen to be gay and lesbian talk about gun ownership. So at least I can say there was a small blessing in the fact that what came from that was an understanding of how important it is for us to be able to defend our lives and the lives of those we love. Now, another part, and Chris, you're going to find this probably somewhat amusing, is that prior to all this, there is actually, so as everyone knows, Chris and I were both members of Gays Against Groomers, which its acronym is GAG, GAG. Well, when I first met Chris and he first talked to me about Gays Against Groomers, and I heard the acronym GAG, I couldn't help but think of another LGBT organization, right? Which is called Gays Against Guns, which is also GAG, by the way. It is an actual organization.
I didn't even know that existed.
Yes, it does. It exists, and they are pretty. Yeah, they're a bit. They're pretty much the same to the Gays for Hamas / Palestine. They're a bit out there. Probably a lot of the same members, honestly. But so I wanted to bring that up quick. That was an experience I've had. Is I've actually engaged with a group, with the organization Gays Against Guns. That did not go well. And then also, I do want to reference the whole situation with Trump recently. So Trump recently shared an article that had a thumbnail of the pink triangle. And there was a lot of craziness about this, because anyone who does understand the history is that in reference to homosexual men, the pink triangle has a history that goes back to Nazi Germany. The homosexual men who were put in concentration camps had the pink triangle put on them, right? And so I in no way have any negative feelings towards Trump for sharing that article, especially since he didn't write the article. He didn't, pick the thumbnail, because it's about, first of all, trans people in the military. Actually, doesn't really have anything to do with homosexuals. But Chris and I will cover that in the future. But also because the pink triangle has been reclaimed a number of times by gay organizations. One of them being ACT UP, but also another one of those organizations that has claimed the pink triangle is actually a pro-Second Amendment, a pro-gun rights group called the Pink Pistols. They also have reclaimed the pink triangle. So I just wanted to add to that to tie back in the Second Amendment. Chris, again, the left talks about how the LGBT, the queer, the rainbow, whatever, the rainbow mafia, right? How we're all victims and everything. Yet they don't support our right to defend our own lives, our own homes, our own families. What do you have to say to that?
Well, and I know I know the base mother will like this as well, because I know her pretty well. But I always like to say that gays with guns don't get bashed. And so yeah, I don't think they're even as far left as I was at some point in time in my life. I don't think that I was ever anti-Second Amendment. I thought it was perfect. As far as the pink triangle thing that you were talking about with Trump, I'm the same way. It's like there's so much, and I'm not trying to call the president ignorant, but I guess he is a little ignorant. But there's lots of ignorance when it comes to the pink triangle. A lot of people don't know what that means. And I am pretty certain that, Trump didn't understand what that exactly meant when he shared that article. And on top of that, the pink triangle thing, was probably a pretty unfortunate thing. What was that? The Washington Times shared. So I mean, that was probably a very unfortunate choice for them to put that up there with a no sign on it and everything, because the pink triangle specifically deals with homosexual men, not even homosexual women. It's only homosexual men. That is exactly what the pink triangle deals with. And so it has nothing to do with the trans stuff. So the fact that the Washington Times chose that even shows their own ignorance to the issue. So, I mean, I don't hold anything against Trump, because it's probably only people like you and me who actually do care about, so-called I don't know, for a lack of a better term, gay history, who do care about those things, we know what it means, but a lot of other people don't. Now, the other thing, as far as more specifically to this video that we just watched, it was good to see this guy come up and approach Charlie in a very thoughtful manner. He was obviously not one of the gays who are consumed with all the LGBTQIA plus crap. He was a free thinker, and he wanted to be able to protect himself. And he respected that and respected what Charlie had to say on those issues, and good for him. I wish there were more gay people who thought of themselves as just normal citizens, as opposed to thinking of themselves as gay citizens.
Exactly.
Because I think of myself as just a normal citizen. Yeah,
Yeah.
I happen to have a husband and I'm a man. Whoop-dee. But at the same time, it's like, all I'm wanting to do is just lead my life the way I see fit. And if I need to protect myself, I want to be able to protect myself just the same as any other American person can do.
Exactly. And Chris, on top of that, I'm looking at this young man who's talking to Charlie Kirk, and I just want to, say that, first of all, looking at him, right, he's obviously a more effeminate gay man, right? He's a more effeminate homosexual man. He seems like he probably is of a smaller stature. And he talked about wearing certain attire as he's going to the clubs and stuff. Probably more flamboyant attire than what he's wearing on campus. And he talked about being a victim already, being mugged, and how he wants to be able to defend himself. Now, it's in the be able to defend himself that we can all relate, that we should all, as Americans, be able to connect with that sentiment. The wanting to be able to defend yourself, because for whatever reason, some people might think you're an easier target. And I think that is one of the key points that this video touches on. Both Charlie Kirk and this young man who spoke to him in a very respectful fashion. I just I wanted us to touch on that, but I want to get to Vinny's comment quick, because Vinny, he's disagreeing with Charlie Kirk here. He's doing a correction, kind of like you did earlier with me with with Scott there. No, but no. So this is Vinny's comment, and I think it'll take us a little bit back to race, but I think it's an important aspect to cover. Vinny said, "I have to disagree with Charlie Kirk on his comment about BLM and how they should support owning guns. Those mainly hate white cops. Those guys mainly hate white cops. So they shouldn't have guns. It will be dangerous to the cops." Now, Vinny, this is where I'm going to disagree a little bit with you, and here's why. Unless someone genuinely does something to justify going to jail, I'm for. So, first of all, and we'll go into this more after our final clip. Here's my view when it comes to gun control laws, and it took me a while to get there, and I'm talking about with mental health issues and all that stuff. If we deem someone as too dangerous to own a gun, then why aren't they also too dangerous to live in society? Why don't we have them in a prison or in a mental institution? Because if we genuinely think that they might kill someone with a gun, how do we know they won't kill someone with a knife, stab someone with a pen, beat someone with a hammer? How else? I mean, should we restrict all that? If we think someone is so dangerous that we're saying to them, you can't have a gun, why don't we also say to them, you can't have a knife, you can't have a pen, you can't have a hammer, you can't have all this? In my personal opinion, if we think someone is genuinely that dangerous, then they shouldn't be allowed to intermingle with the general public of American citizens. That's just my personal take on it. So when it comes to that, I understand the impulse when it comes to those BLM nut jobs to say, to say to those nut jobs, yeah, no, you shouldn't have a gun. I understand the impulse, but I'm gonna have to say no to actually telling them that they can't have a gun unless they've committed a crime that warrants them being in prison. Chris, I'm gonna throw that comment to you.
No, I mean, basically, what I heard you say is we shouldn't be determining who can have a gun based on political beliefs.
Pretty much, yeah. Thank you for summing that up, Chris.
Right.
You did.
That's what I heard you say, and I agree with that 100%. So yeah, BLM, they're nuts for sure. I don't disagree with that. But at the same time, I think that they're just as much American citizens as anyone else, and unless they've done something to prove that they are unfit to own a gun, then I don't really see why they should be restricted from having them. Now, a lot. Probably where Vinny's coming from is we saw lots of law breaking happening in the BLM riots of, what was it, 2020. So, those folks probably shouldn't have guns who are out there setting fire on buildings and setting fire to buildings and that sort of stuff, or at least it should be restricted in some sort of way because of their felonious criminal history. But, we do already have those laws in place. I mean, if you're a felon, you don't have a legal way of getting a gun in this country. You just don't. Well, at least not in my state. So, unless it varies in other states, but I thought that was a federal law. Maybe I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, I mean, at least in Missouri, I mean, if you have a felony background, you pretty much can't ever get a gun.
And Chris, that begs actually a whole nother question. If we believe that someone has served their time and deserves to be back in with the population, why are we then restricting their American freedoms?
Oh, I agree. I mean, because you see it with voting. You see it with voting. You see it with other things.
Right, everyone. Sorry, my battery for some reason is running very low. I do not know why. I'm afraid I'm gonna lose everyone soon. I don't know why my computer is not acknowledging that I have plugged it in. Chris, continue with with your thought while I try to resolve this.
Sure. So I'm going to vamp for a little bit here. All right. So anyway, as far as the felony stuff is concerned, I mean, I do have some problems with the right to vote and stuff like that, those types of restrictions. That does kind of bother me. But, I mean, guns are a very, I don't know, well, I mean, just for lack of a better term, they're a very lethal thing. And so, I mean, to a certain degree, if you have gone so far as committing a felony, especially if it's a violent felony, I mean, let's put it in those terms, because there are felonies that you can commit that aren't necessarily violent. But if you've committed a violent felony, then yeah, sure, I can understand why your rights to bear arms might be restricted.
So, Chris, I'm going to challenge you a little bit there because I got a question for you.
Yeah,
when I was in school, when I was back in my high school and middle school days, I got into not a lot, not as much as many, but I got into a few scuffles with other students. Now, other kids my age, we ended up with, bruises and some blood, just from regular punches and stuff like that. Why then? Now that was on both of our parts an act of violence, right? Should that restrict our abilities for the rest of our lives to be able to bear arms and protect our homes and families. This is where I then challenge that. If someone goes out to the bar, gets a bit drunk and gets into a bar fight, and they're charged with assault, I fully understand the charges of assault, right? They punched someone, they did what they did, all right. But why does that then translate to their ability to bear arms? I mean, I once had someone say this to me a little bit about kids fighting with sticks, right? Well, then you take the sticks away from all the kids. I'm like, well, no, the kids swinging the stick will probably get their stick removed for a little bit. But I guess I have, for me, I like the punishment to suit the crime. So, like, for example, right? Say someone does voter fraud, right? If you want to restrict later their abilities to work at the voting booth or something, all right, I get that. All right, I do. But if someone gets into a fist fight, and then because it was a violent crime, their ability to bear arms is restricted, who says that just because they threw fists, that they're likely to also shoot a gun?
Oh no, that
at someone. This is where this idea of violent people who have been convicted of violent crimes, even in those circumstances, I have to question this idea of restricting their right to the Second Amendment, especially if we believe that they've served their time.
Well, I'm certainly not talking about that sort of thing. And of course, laws vary by state. I mean, at least in Missouri, getting into a fist fight with somebody else is not considered a felony. It's a misdemeanor offense. So it's not going to affect your right to bear arms, at least in my state. So I mean, that's not what I'm talking about. So you do have to keep that in mind. Because obviously a fist fight, that can happen for all sorts of different reasons, that, usually is considered a misdemeanor offense. Even if it's domestic abuse, is still considered a misdemeanor offense, at least under my understanding of Missouri law. Now, however, with domestic abuse, they do make an exception, that you cannot own a gun after you've been convicted of some sort of domestic abuse. And see, I still support that. I think that is perfectly fine, because to me that is kind of protecting women from crazy men. And so I mean, I understand we're probably going to have a little bit of difference on that, because I'm as much as I like the Second Amendment, maybe I'm not a total absolutist on it, because I do think that there are things that you can do that kind of revoke your rights, just like you said, and you even agreed to it. Like somebody convicted of, voting fraud. Well, yeah, I don't want that person ever working at a polling booth.
Well, it depends on what party they are and what party's leading the election. Anyways, no, I'm just kidding. No, I'll just get.
But I get what you're saying. But I mean, that's the thing. It's like, I do think there are certain things that you can do that you pretty much kind of give up everything for.
Chris, I'm in a corny mood. What do you think? Should these guns be illegal?
Oh no!
All right.
Those are great guns. Those are
right to bear arms. Is that the right to bear arms? No. All right. So no. But seriously, that is really where I actually kind of like what the base mother just said in the comments. She just said fist fights used to be thought of as life lessons, not misdemeanors. I actually agree with that personally. I also.
Oh, I do too.
Yeah.
Trust me, the base mother, I agree with you. I was just talking about it from legal terms.
Yeah. And I have to acknowledge this difference between Chris and I. Chris is in Missouri. I'm in New York. We're giving someone a dirty look. They're trying to make illegal, pretty much. So Chris and I grew up in and live in very, very different environments. Vinny, you want to know how much weight I bench right now? Let me go weigh the sandwich I ate earlier. I'll let you know. The last dessert I had. It's winter, Vinny. I ain't bench pressing anything heavier than dinner. I'm gonna be honest. But the to get to that point is that I think it would help us, and I think Chris, you'd agree with this. It would be interesting for us to have a stream in regards to gun legislation specifically, because for me, I and like I said, I was once that I really was. Violent offenders, should be restricted. But then again, what defines violent offenders? Is it a fist fight? Is it specifically someone who is violent with guns, violent with knives, violent with, I don't know, a baseball bat, a baseball? Did they throw a binder at someone's head?
That's where I do agree with the base mother, because when it comes to something, like I said, I mean, I was speaking of it in more legal terms. I agree with her, because the thing is like, yes, I was calling it a misdemeanor, but that's the I'm talking about violent felony offenses. That is something where I'm kind of like, yeah, I could see restricting them. Maybe not for the rest of their lives, even, but for a certain period of time.
Would you say maybe through the getting out, but also through the parole, where they're shown the parole period of getting out of jail, getting out of prison?
That you're a responsible citizen again. I mean, that sort of thing. And then if that's what you are, cool. Then have your guns back. I don't care. But just simply that, you've done this sort of thing that is a violent felony, and like I said, again, we're not talking fistfights, because that doesn't count, at least in Missouri, as a violent felony. So, I mean, if it does raise to the level of a violent felony, which is, we're talking about attempted murder, those types of things. Yeah, I mean, I think that, or even manslaughter, which may not involve any sort of, criminal intent, but it was basically manslaughter, at least in the state of Missouri, is reckless criminal intent. And so, yeah, I mean, those are kind of things where it's like, yeah, you're kind of showing that you're not really that trustworthy of a citizen. That's kind of where I'm coming from. But, if you can, through maybe the parole process and, following up with your parole officer and all that type of stuff, and you keep on the up and up, okay, then maybe I'm willing to consider giving you your guns back. But that's just me. I'm not saying I'm necessarily 100% right, because you know how I am, Kevin. I'm a pretty open-minded guy.
Oh, yeah.
I can be convinced, if the argument makes sense to me. But right now, that's kind of where I stand.
And for me, Chris, I can be, for me, what I strive for is consistency of logic. So I strive for a consistent logic that I can apply across the board on a given topic. And I used to actually, very much as I said, I used to say, well, if you were convicted of a violent crime and you're out, then you should be restricted. But then someone asked me, if this person who was convicted of a violent crime, if they've gone through our system and we still think they're too much of a threat to own a weapon, why are we letting them out of jail? That got the gears turning in my head, and I was like, well, actually, and then that same person pointed out to me, what if the violent crime was a fist fight? Why should that impact their right to own guns, knives, anything like that? And as actually Billy referenced earlier, bear arms was bear weapons in general. So you could argue bear arms actually covering knives and so on and so forth. We've just come to understand it as guns. So I definitely can say, Chris, that my journey, I had my own journey when it came to that, because I've always considered myself pro Second Amendment. it's how pro Second Amendment I've been has changed over time because people challenged me in ways that I was like, well, yeah, actually, the way I'm thinking then about gun control laws is logically inconsistent for me. For me. So I always love having that dialogue, that conversation back and forth.
Sure, and like I said, I mean, guys, I'm not talking about fist fights. You know, I mean, like I said, you know, that is generally considered a misdemeanor crime anyway. To my knowledge, I just looked it up. In most states, it's considered a misdemeanor crime.
Yeah.
So I'm certainly not talking about something like that anyway.
Yeah. Well, also, I mean, come on, we have where we're spitting on someone is an assault charge. So, I mean, so I just thought back to what was the show there with what was her name? Her name was New York, and it was what, Pumpkin or some crap like that. With Flavor, was it Flavor Flav? Sorry. There was a whole dating show back in the day where one woman spit on another, and the one woman grabbed her hair, and it's like, well, that's actually assault.
Oh, yes, I remember that. Well, technically it is, but surely that would be, again, a misdemeanor.
Exactly. All right, so we spent some time on this. I do want us to get to the last video because I think something that Chris and I will definitely fully agree on, hopefully many of our viewers will, is I personally believe in preparing the next generation of gun owners. I do not want gun owners to be uneducated. You know, now that doesn't mean necessarily I agree in supporting laws that require a specific type of education. That does not mean that. But I do support educating gun owners. Heck, here in New York State, actually in New York City, we once had gun clubs in schools where youth actually learned how to fire guns, how to respect guns, and how to use them properly. And speaking of New York State, it's actually why I chose this next clip, which bear with me, it is a bit long. It actually is of exactly that. In New York State, teaching young individuals, young people, men and women, how to be safe when it comes to owning a gun and using a gun. So here we go.
Hi, I'm outdoors writer David Figura, and today I'm at the Newark Rod and Gun Club, where the Palmyra, Macedon, and Mid-Lakes High School trap shooting clubs are shooting and having a good time. Next week. Why are you so high on this club that you're coaching?
It's just a great way to teach gun safety to our youth and point them in the right direction for, it's a lifelong activity that they're going to be able to do forever. The great thing about this sport is that it engages the kids and gets them working together in their camaraderie, helping each other. And safety is always on their mind. It's amazing watching these young kids develop and coach each other.
My son started shooting in Boy Scouts, and he doesn't hunt or anything. This is just an extension of it, and he really enjoys it. This is his second year doing it, and he's making a lot of new friends, and he's just having a lot of fun. Renee, what do you like about your son Robert being on this club?
Robert's not a sports kid, so this offered him a team activity that still required him keeping up his grades just like soccer or football would, and it really caught his interest, so it was engaging, and he really enjoys it. This is his third year.
I like the hunt, and it's just fun because you like to shoot guns, and then it's just fun, really.
The best about trap shooting is how fun it is. Like, we come here every Thursday, and we shoot, and we get to shoot 50 rounds every day. And even when you miss, it's still fun, as long as you hit a couple. But other than that, I don't know. Just a fun club to do.
The Schumacher sisters. Who's the best shot here of you two?
She is.
Nia, what do you like about trap shooting?
I love the smell of the gunpowder, and I love challenging myself.
All right. So Right there. For me, I'm gonna be straight up honest. I fully support, and I want to go back to the one image there, just because right there, these are two sisters. I support, I support gun education. Like I said, that does not mean I support any necessary like legal enforcement of it, but I support educating our young when it comes to gun handling and gun ownership. And the thing is, this used to be common throughout America. I mean, I taught you. I talked to my uncles, my aunts, if you talk to your grandparents, there were actually times in rural environments, more so, but still, where kids would show up with guns in their trucks in the back, the rifle, right? To school. They'd park and just go in. And we didn't have all these, all the school shootings and stuff, which horrific, evil events, of course. But I personally think that those events are more in line with the breakdown of the family unit, are more in line with that, with the breakdown of the family unit and involved parents, than they are gun ownership. Personally, because gun ownership goes back centuries. We got teens owning guns and having them in their vehicles at school and at school clubs going back a long time. Yet we don't have the school shootings the way, So I personally think it's the breakdown of the family unit in regards to that. But I do support this, Chris. I support what we just saw. We have a new generation of gun owners being taught how to safely handle a firearm. What's your take on that?
Sure. Absolutely. I think that this is wonderful, seeing these kids out there learning about guns, learning how to responsibly deal with them. In the state of Missouri, like I think I've told you before, we really have no requirement for any sort of gun education, but the state does offer a concealed carry permit, even though it's still legal here to conceal carry on your own without any sort of permit. You don't have to have it. But if you do want to get the permit, they will go ahead and put you through some gun education classes, and it's all gun safety. And it's also tells you what to do if you actually shoot and kill someone, and how you need to handle yourself and those sorts of things. And it's very good. It's a very good educational program. So even though it's not required, I made sure to go ahead and get it because it also offers you a little bit of extra legal protection as well. That's something that people need to keep in mind. So even if your state doesn't require a concealed carry permit, from a legal standpoint, it might be a good idea to see if your state still offers one, like Missouri does, because they do. So it's kind of the same thing. I mean, we're making it so that guns are not like these scary things that people don't understand. They're understanding that they are tools, because that's essentially what they are. They're tools that you can use for enjoyment or self-defense or hunting or whatever the case may be. I mean, primarily most of the time when I am shooting off a gun, it is just simply for target practice. That's it. That's the only reason I'm shooting. And I personally have 4 guns. My husband has 1, and they're fun things that we like to go out and enjoy together. I go through all the education because I am a member of the NRA. So I go through all the education and then I pass it on to my husband, which is great because then it gives me an opportunity to keep those concepts in my mind, because when you start teaching somebody else, it makes you remember that stuff a little bit more.
Yeah. Chris,
yeah.
So I was going to say, tell me if you find this as insane as I do, right? Because you say to someone in general, especially someone on the left, your average Democrat, I support, driving classes in schools. And cars aren't even a constitutional Right. But if you tell them I support driver's ed in school, they'd be like, oh yeah, usually. Yeah, absolutely. But if you talk about a constitutional right, such as the right to bear arms, and that you support that also being taught in school, that's monstrous. It's quite quite interesting how they come with that.
Well, unfortunately, the average Democrat right now supports sex education in schools that includes talks about transgenderism. So I don't know that they're necessarily the best people to listen to at this moment.
Oh, absolutely. We have a lot of comments that have popped up on YouTube, so I do apologize, everyone, if I can't get to all of them. Mind you, in part, you're all having a conversation with each other, which I appreciate. Love y'all. Agreeing with each other, disagreeing. But I do want to focus on one comment and one question. So the comment is from Stacy. Stacy said, dudes, in my high school, we did. No locked trucks, loaded guns in the gun rack, not locked at all. Right? That was common. So that goes more to my belief that the real issue with any rise in violence we've seen among youth and guns has to do with the breakdown of the family unit. It doesn't have anything specifically to do with guns, because if kids want to be violent towards each other, they're going to find a way. Now, the question comes from Billy, and I'll throw this one to you first, Chris, because I have more of a humorous take on that one. Billy asks, Kevin and Chris, how do you feel about arming teachers and school staff? So, Chris, how do you feel about that?
I'm not necessarily opposed to it. I think that it should be kind of an opt-in situation, so if the teacher wants to do it, I would like to see, some, as far as if we did do that, like we're saying, hey, you have the ability to bring your gun to school, because most schools, at least where I live, do not permit any sort of firearms whatsoever. And that is under Missouri state law, a right that, an organization has. They have the right to ban firearms on their property. So, and pretty much all schools do. So if we are going to do something like that, kind of like I said, I was talking about the concealed carry class, that was voluntary in the state of Missouri. But maybe for teachers, if they're going to be having it, I would like to know that they have gone through some sort of safety training of some sort before they're actually having guns around kids. So, yeah, I am in favor of it in theory, but as long as the person is actually trained. And that might be one instance where I guess I would favor some sort of legally mandated education class before the person's allowed to do that.
I'm going to respond to that real quickly. I'm having an interesting night, from electrical issues to animal issues. I got to close the door real quick because the cat and dog are acting up. One moment.
Okay. All right. So it's the Chris show again. So here we go. I'm going to fill some empty air. But the reason I say that, Billy, is because, not because I think that, people are necessarily...
I apologize.
You're okay. I was filling the air. It's not that I think that people are necessarily going to be irresponsible with these weapons, but, let's think about this for a second. A lot of these teachers are also the same people that are teaching kids about pronouns and, whether they're transgender or not. So, I want these idiots to know how to use a gun if they are going to actually keep one in their classroom. So that's where I'm coming from.
So my take on this, at first from a little bit of a lot harder perspective, is I think about my high school teachers and how many of them I pissed off, and I don't know if I'm comfortable with them having guns. I'm just...
All right,
I had a few I would call them emotional teachers, and I made them even more emotional. No, but I will say this, right? Because we do have a long history and tradition in this country and throughout the world, and I support it, of our laws that impact children being different than our laws that impact adults. It's how we are, right? We govern when it comes to laws that impact children differently than we do with laws that just impact adults. That's just how it is. So and I support that because children need that extra protection, that extra security. So Billy, when it comes to teachers being allowed to have guns in schools to protect students or security guards, I do support it. However, I also support the training, the required training, that they have the permits, that they've actually taken those efforts because they're protecting children. They're not just protecting themselves, their homes, their families. It's not your standard Second Amendment situation. You're dealing with an individual who's being entrusted to protect an entire generation of children, of youth. So I do want that individual to be trained. And when it comes, so that's teachers, right? And security guards, right? Now, in those cases, I would favor especially with security guards, any individuals who have backgrounds in military service or law enforcement. I would honestly, if I had children going to a school, I do have a godson. If he's going to a school with security, I would prefer that the security have a background in law enforcement or a military background. And especially if they were armed, then I also want them going through training and certification. Now, Billy did say training being mandatory. So yeah, I do support it. But since we're dealing with children and given our history as a nation of obviously legislating issues that impact children differently, I do support certain legal requirements with teachers or security in schools having guns.
Well,
that I do support.
And the way I look at it, Billy, is honestly, I mean, if are we okay with police officers going out and having absolutely no firearms training? Probably not. We're probably not okay with that. Are we okay with our military going out and going to war with absolutely no firearms training? Probably not. So, I mean, if this is going to be a government official, and let's face it, that's what teachers kind of are. If this is going to be a government official of some sort, that we're going to authorize to keep a firearm for the purpose of protecting their class, then I think it's totally fair to say that, yeah, they should be required to have some sort of training to make sure that they're being safe with it. So, I mean, that's kind of how I see it.
And Billy also responded in regards to specifically teachers and school security that should also require a written test with a minimum score of 85%. So yeah, I think most of us here, obviously Chris and I, and in the comments all agree that when it comes to adults having guns in an environment where they're protecting children, such as a school, then yeah, obviously stronger requirements are understandable and reasonable and should exist. Absolutely. So I think we're ready to just go to more of a general conversation because it's funny, Chris. I knew this was going to be a long one. By the way, people, I had like 2 more videos I wanted to add, 2 or 3. And then I sent a message to Chris saying I'm only going to do 5 because I have a feeling we're going to take up some time. We're at 1 hour and 24 minutes right now. So I think we're ready to quickly go into our more general conversation when it comes to the topic. Just in general, Chris, what do you feel about the Second Amendment in the context of America, and why do you support it so?
Well, I think that the reason that I am a Second Amendment supporter is because my father was a police officer. And the thing is, one of the things that came up earlier is we were talking about guns and race and stuff like that. And this maybe ties into it a little bit. But when my dad was a police officer in Kansas City, and he was in Kansas City, we're not talking about where I live currently, where I live in a suburb of Kansas City. He was a police officer in Kansas City, so the hardcore crap happened to him. We had some race-based riots that happened here in the 70s and early 80s. And so he was one of the patrol officers that had to go in to that situation. So, I mean, basically think the George Floyd protests, but just the 80s and 70s version of it. And in fact, actually, the 80s and 70s version of it was probably worse than what we experience now. I mean, these people were torching large parts of Kansas City at the time. If you went into the black neighborhoods, and when I say black neighborhoods, I'm just saying that it's predominantly black people there, which he did. He got to know these people very well. And there was this old man during these race riots that happened, and they were coming through his neighborhood and they were torching random houses. And these were the homes of black people. They were trying to make some sort of political point, but they were hurting their own community. And so this old man that my dad, I'll never forget this old man who was sitting on his porch with his rifle in his arms. And he was like, excuse my language, guys. He's like, if any of those son of a bitches come up to my house, I'm blowing their heads off. And I was like, good for that man, because that's what they were doing. I mean, a lot of this leftist bullshit, is pretty much, just burn it all down type of stuff.
Yep.
So they will go ahead and attack anyone regardless of who they are. And anyway, when my dad, who was a uniformed police officer at that time, came up to him and was like, hey, sir, why do you have your gun? And blah, blah, blah. And he told him, and he told my dad, is like, if any of these son of a bitches come up to my house, I'm blowing their heads off. And my dad was like, good for you. Go right ahead and do that. I'll see you later, sir. And he shook his hand and he walked on.
So, Chris, I think you touch on something very important there, because even with the George Floyd riots, right, when we deal with that here this day and age, and I talk to people about the destruction, they talk about Target, they talk about Rite Aid, they talk about, a federal building even, stuff like that. But what the left refuses to talk about, and I do mean in my experience, refuses to talk about, and to be honest, I want to do a stream on this where it's just about these individuals, all the mom and pop shops that were destroyed during the George Floyd violence, during that quote unquote summer of peace, right? The fiery but mostly peaceful protests, fiery, right? Where you had people losing their their shops, their regular shops, the mom and pop shops, the corner store beauty shop, the barber shop, all these little shops that were destroyed during these riots, that weren't the Targets or the Rite Aids or whatever, right? That weren't the corporate entities. But whenever you talk to a lot of those back years ago, Chris, we called them the social justice warriors, now the woke crowd and BLM. Whenever we talk to them and try to bring up those mom and pop shop owners, they just go right to the corporate, the corporate companies that were damaged. And they just absolutely refuse to acknowledge the common man and woman who suffered as a result of these George Floyd riots. And they will even refuse to a point of blocking you. And I've had so-called friends do that. So I support the individuals of all the individual right, the right of all those individuals to bear arms and protect what's theirs. Absolutely. But Chris, I think, would you agree, to kind of get us closer to wrapping this up? We're almost at an hour and a half. That this really is about the individual's right to protect themselves, their family, their property, even if it's a store, their home, just their loved ones in general, from threats both foreign and domestic.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know that I threw in a couple of caveats here and there, but I mean, trust me, guys, I'm not some gun control freak. I mean, these aren't things that I am absolutely firm in. I'm just talking about like maybe what might make a little bit of sense. But I mean, really, when it gets down to it, that's what I like about the Second Amendment. That's what my dad liked about the Second Amendment. Is that it gave people the opportunity to take care of themselves. And I guess that's why the Second Amendment was so ingrained in me, is because my father has a law enforcement background. He was like, what are you going to do when the cops aren't able to be there right away? He asked those questions. And so he instilled it into me that my right to bear arms and have guns and protect myself were an essential part of being an American citizen.
Mm-hmm.
And so, those things are very ingrained in me. So yeah, I 100% agree with you. I mean, really, ultimately, there's not really much disagreement here.
Yeah. No, and trust me, there won't be disagreement, because Chris and I, we don't just stream together. We're good friends. We visit, I have been to Missouri to visit Chris. We have friends that we visit in Arkansas as well, really good friends. And this summer, Chris is coming to visit me and my husband here in New York State, and he's gonna go shooting with us. So we're definitely looking forward to that. So that's gonna be a great time. But yeah, we could go on for so much longer when it comes to the Second Amendment, because there is just so much that this topic encompasses altogether. And we probably will do another stream in the future. But I'd say we should probably wrap this one up tonight, Chris? Especially, especially with it being St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah, and I'm sure Nathan wants me to get out there and have a couple of beers with him too.
I know I need to have at least one more drink as well myself. I know I had a couple before the stream, but like I said, St. Patrick's Day, give me that pass. But yeah, so first, before we go and go with the closing statements and stuff, I just want to thank everyone for tuning in. And also, if you think that you'd be a good guest for Chris and I to have an interview on a topic, let us know. Chris and I, as we've said before, we're not just looking to talk at you. We want to have a conversation with you. So whether it's responding to your comments on YouTube or Facebook, or even possibly having you on as a guest in the future, we'd love to do that. We just gotta, especially if it's having you a guest on, we just gotta talk about it a bit more. So feel free to comment and message us about that.
Well,
in that regard,
the base mother would be a great person to have on. That is for sure. I mean, base mother. Well, I mean, I just adore her like you wouldn't believe.
Oh, absolutely. We're gonna. So here, thing is, we want base mother. Although I want to say base mama, because I like that reference more. Anyway, so base mother. We'd love to have her on. We'd love to have you on. Obviously, we've already talked about having Vinny on. And we'd love to have Billy Painter on with both of us as well.
Oh,
and the base mother just commented, we'll talk for 7 hours. I think that would happen with everyone if we let it. So that's where I'm going to leave it. I'm going to leave it with this thought to you, Chris, is for me personally, I
Well,
just support the right to bear arms. I support the right of every American citizen for us to protect our lives, our families, our homes, our property, from threats, both foreign and domestic, because that is the Second Amendment. And that is what I support at the end of the day.
yeah.
Chris, I'll throw it to you.
All right. Yeah. And absolutely, base mother. Let's definitely do this because we will talk forever, but that's okay because it'll make for a good show. But the other thing is the Second Amendment has actually played quite a role in my life, my entire life, because my father and the way he brought me up, and also my grandfathers as well. The Second Amendment was very important to both of those guys too. So I don't see the problem with it whatsoever, and the way that I don't see necessarily any sort of problem in the way that it's been interpreted by the Supreme Court either, and insofar as it gives us the rights to pretty much, be able to defend ourselves. So yeah, guys, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It was wonderful. I look forward to you all joining us again next week. We'll be in the process of coming up with a new topic. Maybe we'll have one of you guys on, maybe pitch us some topics or something like that. That's a good idea. So the base mother has my text number, so or my phone number, so let me know.
Ooh, she is elite. The based mother is elite. She has your text number. No.
All right. So have a wonderful night, guys. Thank you.
Have a wonderful night. Again, happy St. Patrick's Day. Safe partying, safe travels. God bless everyone. And we'll catch you next Monday.